One of the biggest decisions that Congress will make this year is whether and how to extend the 2017 Trump tax cuts, officially known as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Big parts of those tax cuts are scheduled to expire this year. Recently, the Republican controlled US House of Representatives took the first step in that direction. It passed a budget resolution authorizing $4.5 trillion in tax cuts to be paid for in part with $2 trillion in cuts to programs. The only member of Oregon's delegation to vote in favor of this budget resolution was Representative Cliff Bentz, who represents Oregon's 2nd congressional district. Today, I want to talk about one of the arguments that Representative Bentz has been making in support for renewing the Trump tax cuts and the obvious flaw in that argument. For those who have looked at the numbers, it's clear that the 2017 Trump tax cuts were heavily skewed in favor of the wealthy. So extending these tax cuts in their entirety would amount to yet another tax giveaway to the wealthy, as we will see later on in this video. As many critics have pointed out, there's simply no way to slash a couple $1 trillion from the federal budget without having to do massive cuts to Medicaid, which is the Oregon health plan here in Oregon, to supplemental nutrition assistance, to many other programs that help people meet their basic needs. This is Representative Bentz speaking at a town hall in Boardman in late February, making his case for renewing the Trump tax cuts.
If we let the tax cuts expire, then this is the amount of additional tax that people will pay next year. The Trump that are in these counties, you can look at your county and see what the average tax hit is going to be, the additional tax that you will pay. So the trick is, how in the world do we avoid that damaging impact upon people, not to mention the economy?
And this is Representative Bentz speaking to Dave Miller of OPB's Think Out Loud program.
What about the argument that given the cost issues you're talking about, now is not a great time to extend a tax cut that would cost the federal government $4.5 trillion?
I'm not sure there's any good time to raise taxes by $4.5 trillion, because that's what you're suggesting is the proper alternative. You may not be suggesting that, but the alternative is to let those tax cuts expire and then see the greatest tax hike in the United States' history. So the challenge is, how do we not allow that to happen and have the economic consequences, negative economic consequences occur? This is an important matter, particularly for every person listening should understand that they will see, if they're paying income tax, a substantial tax hike if this Trump tax cut bill passed back in 2017 is not extended.
So in essence, Representative Bentz is saying that there are only two options here. You either let the tax cuts expire in their entirety for everyone, or you renew the tax cuts for everyone. It's either or. But clearly that's not the case. Other options exist. And one of those other options is to let the tax cuts for the wealthy expire. In other words, you keep in place the tax cuts for the middle class and for Oregonians who are struggling to get by on low wages, while you let the tax cuts for the rich expire. Letting the tax cuts for the rich expire while protecting ordinary folks is the common sense move here. And to understand why, it's important to take a look at the big picture. Over the past 4 decades, the income of the richest Oregonians, the top 1%, has exploded. And that's the dark blue line on this chart. Meanwhile, the income of the typical Oregonian, the Oregonian right in the middle, has stagnated. And that's the flat line in light blue. And that line, as you can see, has basically gone nowhere in the past 4.5 decades. But it gets worse. As bad as income inequality is, inequality on the basis of wealth is even more extreme. In 2022, 3 billionaires in Oregon together had about twice the wealth as the bottom half of all Oregonians combined. Again, just 3 people had about twice as much wealth as the bottom half of all Oregonians together. So economic inequality is at extreme levels. And this is a crucial point to keep in mind when discussing who benefits from extending the 2017 Trump tax cuts. This chart here shows how much different groups of Oregonians would get from extending the Trump tax cuts in full. As you can see in this estimate by the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, if all of the Trump tax cuts are extended, in 2026, the poorest Oregonians would get on average a tax cut of about $100. The Oregonians in the middle would get about $860. But the richest 1% of Oregonians would get a tax cut of about $22,000 on average. And the richest of the richest 1/10 of 1% of Oregonians and Americans would get tax cuts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we're talking about massive tax cuts for the very rich here. As Sharon Parrott, president of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, points out, the cost of extending the tax cuts for the top 1%, $1.1 trillion through 2034, equals roughly the same amount as the proposed potential cuts for health coverage under Medicaid and food assistance. That's why Parrott and others are right in saying that the House budget plan makes deep cuts to Medicaid, to nutrition assistance, and to other vital programs just to fund a massive tax giveaway to the wealthy. So again, it's wrong to say that there are only 2 options here, that you either extend the tax cuts for everyone or let the tax cuts expire for everyone. Congress and Representative Bentz have another choice. That third option is to let the tax cuts for the rich expire while keeping in place the tax cuts for the middle class and for working Oregonians who are struggling to get by. And in doing so, we can protect Medicaid, nutrition assistance, and other vital programs that people count on. That's the common sense option. That's the right option for the country and for our state.